you very much for setting this up. Thanks for hosting. Many of you will have met before. I'm Sarah Horden, so I'm Vice Chair at Oxford University Hospitals NHS FT. I'm Chair of the NHS Homes Alliance, which is a very grand title for something that very much is a collaboration of the willing. Many of you will have heard either me or Rowley talk at these forums over the last few months, but effectively it was a conversation that started, I think, in numerous trusts about the fact that we know that retention and recruitment of our people is a key issue, and one of the big challenges is providing affordable accommodation and affordable homes, more importantly, in places where people want to live for the long term, close to work, that are affordable, so that they're not having a long commute on top of a long day. And that conversation, I got involved back in 2022. I spoke at the European Health Design Conference, and from that, I think there's been a gradual coming together. So Richard, your group, which has been very powerful within London, but I think trusts coming together across the country, but also with the private sector, so lawyers, accountants, finance partners, developers, all seeing that this is a great opportunity to do something different, but I think also realising that there are a number of challenges that come from being in the NHS, from NHS procurement and from NHS accounting rules, and that some of those challenges are better solved centrally. So the Homes Alliance it came together last year. I was trying to see if we could find some political support to move this forward, and was challenged to write a white paper. Realised very rapidly that I did not have all the answers, and that there were people far better qualified than me who did have the answers. So the white paper was really crowdsourced. Many of you contributed. It's available on the NHS Homes Alliance website. We published it last summer, and I also went to see the then Housing Minister, Victoria McLean, and also Lord Markham hosted a round table as at DHSC. And from that, he has taken up the mantle. He's been a huge supporter and has led a joint ministerial task force, which Ian Burden is here today, act for NHSC on that task force. The task force has basically taken the white paper and has gone away to see whether they can deliver some of the solutions that were discussed in that white paper, and the starting point being very much, can they come up with a formal finance structure that Treasury will sign off on? And that is the key starting point, because if we can get that away, then all of the other questions flow through from behind it. And I don't know whether Ian might be able to give a bit more update maybe at the end, Richard, but that's where it's at. So the conversation is live, it hasn't gone away. And as part of that conversation, one of the pieces in the white paper was, what is an affordable rent? Yeah, we all know that 80% of market value in certain locations, if you're on a band 5/6 wage of £30,000 a year, is not affordable. And that has led to conversations around, can you make rent personalised? Can you have a rent structure that changes as your career changes? And speaking at a conference last autumn, I met Olivia Harris, who's very kindly joined us here today. She is the CEO of Dolphin Living, a charity based in London, and she can explain more about what Dolphin Living do. But she was talking about personalised rents, and Richard and I thought that it was be great to hear experience from another sector, but within London, of a really practical approach to how we tackle both what's an affordable rent and actually what else you can do to support people on their housing journey. So Olivia, thank you very much for joining us. And then we've also got Stephen Barnes from Capita, who's going to talk to us about the challenges that they've faced around making those NHS rents affordable. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Olivia, and then I think we'll do Olivia, let Olivia talk, and then take questions, and then move over to Stephen and do questions. Or do you want to both speak and then we do questions? I don't mind which way.
Probably I've got some points where people might want to ask questions during the presentation, so
okay,
when it's fresh in their mind.
Let's do that. So Olivia, and without further ado, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Sarah, for and Richard for arranging this. It's really interesting. I'll tell you a bit about Dolphin Living in a minute, but we've been trying to work with sort of NHS trusts or NHS organisations, or I've contacted the Royal College of Nursing before about, when I say promoting our product, it's not because I want to promote our product to benefit us, it's because I want to promote our product to benefit your members. But we've had a bit of pushback, so I'd be really interested in your feedback, because people don't want to promote us as an organisation, there seems to be. But if there's anything that you can do to let your members and let your employees know that we exist as an organisation, and particularly the locations that we work in, I'd really appreciate that. So I've got a presentation, and so I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully I'll share the right thing. Okay, Sarah, can you just let me know if you can see that as a presentation?
Yeah, can see it as a presentation, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, let's move on to the next screen. It doesn't seem to be quite coming up, so let me just give me a minute. For some reason it's not responding. Let me just try.
It's now moved to personalised
Now
rents.
fine, brilliant. It's obviously just gone a bit of a go slow, so let me just see. Here we go. Right. I've done this presentation in sort of various different forums, to the National Housing Federation, to other housing associations, and people have quite often said, but that wouldn't work for me. What I want to say is that our personalised rents are not the solution, they're just one of the solutions. So it's about understanding the principles of what I'm going to say and thinking about how you could apply it to work in your local area or with the people that you want to support. So first of all, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about Dolphin Living. And we're the brand, Dolphin Living is the brand name for the Dolphin Square Charitable Foundation and subsidiaries. We were formed in 2005 out of the sale of Dolphin Square, which is an apartment block, one of the sort of original build to rents in Pimlico. And our primary charitable objective is to provide reasonable assistance in our trust deed to those working in London who cannot afford market housing near their place of work. And we've interpreted that by providing homes to rent at a discount to market rent in central London locations. So we've got, here it says 840 homes. A substantial proportion of those are in Westminster, but we work in a number of other London boroughs. Generally, the way we let our homes is governed by the Section 106 agreement, because about 2/3 of them are new homes. And that requires us to give priority to people that live and work in the same borough as the housing. And there's an income cap, or household income cap, that's set by the Mayor of London at 60,000, and in Westminster it's £90,000 household income. And that's a range of 1 and 2 and 3 bedroom flats, and sometimes we've got families, and sometimes we've got sharers or single people living in those. We're quite small as an organisation. We've got 15 employees, and we outsource our property management and our development function. So we are continuing to grow whilst managing the 840 homes that we've got under management. I'd like to give you an introduction to the New Era estate in Hackney, and I think in order to understand what we're going to tell you, it's necessary to understand the background to our purchase of the estate. So in 2015, it's in January 2015, the New Era estate was purchased by a fund called Westbrook from the long-term owners of the estate, who started to put up the rents by 10% and refurbish vacant flats. And the residents, you can see some of them here, were fearful that they were going to have their tenancies terminated. And so they raised a petition and went to Downing Street, and they gained the support of Russell Brand, who obviously is no longer someone that we sort of would be able to do this anymore, but he was instrumental to raising the publicity of the estate. And from pressure from the government and from the Mayor of London, Westbrook were forced to sell the estate, and Dolphin Living purchased it in December 2014. And I first met this group of residents in January 2015. And they'd obviously been through a really, really unsettling time. And so we had to work with them. But what I just wanted to share with you here, someone mentioned affordability and market rents being, affordable rents being 80% of market rent. These are all market homes there's no planning restriction, but for sort of historic reasons, they've been let at below market rents. And the residents had run it like a much more traditional estate. They had carried out repairs themselves where, you know, if they didn't have central heating in their flats, they'd fitted central heating, they fitted kitchens and bathrooms themselves. And that is reflected in the rents that they were paying, but also that there was no allocations of criteria or nominations criteria. So there was a traditional rent collector on the estate, and we had multiple generations living in the estate. But we didn't know that when flats became available, they were going to those that needed it. They were going to the friends and family and people that were currently living on the estate. So shortly after we purchased the estate, like I said, we went and met with the residents, and they put certain demands on us about what they wanted for this estate. And we had to push back to them a bit and talk to them about how we were a long-term investor in the homes, we were a charity, we would do right by them, but we also had a responsibility to be able to maintain the estate for the future. And so we wrote them a letter after that meeting, setting out what our promises were. And the first one is obviously no rent increases, because they just had a 10% rent increase. And we set about carrying out some necessary repairs and improving the health and safety on the estate. And then we started working on the fourth point of this letter, which is to put into place a fair rent policy, bearing in mind, as I said earlier, that there hadn't been any allocations criteria on the estate. And so we created what we call our personalised rents policy. Now, what I think I'm going to do is go through the next 5 slides. And then while it's fresh in people's minds, if anyone's got a question, once I've gone through all 5 slides explaining the policy, then that might be an opportunity to ask questions. I've then got a few more slides I'd like to go through about sort of since we implemented it, what's happened. So how do we come up with a personalised rents policy? This is a different property, and this sets out the rent on in a particular block of 3 different flats. And the formula that the Mayor of London tells us to use is that someone's rent should be no more than 40% of their net income. So if you start with the rent, which is set in the section of the planning agreement, you arrive at the required net income. The difference between the required income and the rent is the residual weekly income. And so the question is, why does home A only need £257 a week to live on, whereas home C needs 443? And this is what happened was the rents drive the minimum incomes that we can say can afford that home. But actually people with home C would often come and say to us, but I don't need that much money. What I should also tell you is that these are all 1-bedroom flats in the same location. So there was a breakdown in the formula that we were being given by which to assess people's ability to afford their rents. And so we came up with this proposal that actually we looked at, I'm sure many of you are aware of the Joseph Rowntree minimum income standards, and if not, I encourage you to have a look at their website. But what this does is it sets what they call a minimum income standard for lots and lots of different household compositions and types, how much each household, based on the number of people in the household, the age, the occupation, in terms of are they at school or are they working or are they retired, how much they need to participate in society. So it's above the basic standard that might be set out by those that are receiving benefits. And we said that people's net income needed to be at least their base rent plus the Joseph Rowntree minimum income standard, and then they might have some residual income. And where we had residual income, this was divided into the top part of this graph, which is extra disposable income, and the bit above the white line that's still in dark blue, the additional rent that they would pay. So what we said is if someone has £1 of extra income above their living cost and basic rent, half of that would come to us as rent, and half of that would be their money to, to enhance their living standards. I'll just give you a minute to look at this. What you can see on this graph is that as a household's income increases, going left to right, so does the amount of rent they can afford to pay, so does their extra disposable income, but their living cost remains constant because that's dependent on the household composition. And so if we look at this, sorry, I know I'm going through this quite quickly. I'll give you an opportunity in case anyone's got any questions in a minute. If we look at this in a slightly different way, that first graph was looking at what happens as a household's income changes, assuming the same household size. Here we've got 2 different types of households, both earning 35,000. The top line being a couple, the bottom line being, the top line being a single person, the bottom line being a couple. you can see that their base rent, which is dark grey, is the same, but their minimum income standard living cost, which is the blue, is greater, logically, for a couple than for a single person. And what that means is their residual income, which is divided into their personalised rent and their disposable income, is different depending on household composition. And if we just reorder the blocks in this graph, what we get now is the rent that someone pays, which is made up of the dark grey block and the lighter grey block, is greater for a single person than it is for a couple under a personalised rents policy. So that's quite a lot for people to take in. So I just wanted to see if anyone, I can't see if anyone's got hands raised, but has anyone got a question that they want to ask now? Sarah, would you just see if there's anyone?
Yeah, so I can't see any raised hands at the moment. So I would keep going.
Oh,
there's one. Richard.
I think Mark's got his hand up too. You may cover this anyway, Olivia, but there was two things that I just wanted to ask about at some point, which is one, just about how the kind of management and administration of it all is done, which you may cover later. And then also just if you're not talking more about the technicalities, my understanding was that there's a limit on how much that rent increases at any given time. Just that it's a kind of gradual increase rather than just being one giant bump in some cases.
I'm going to come on to both those points. They're both really good points. I just want to make sure people understand the principles behind how you set a personalised rent, that they are points. Yes, you're absolutely right. We need to consider them. Did someone else have a question?
I think Mark had his hand up, but I may have covered it. So
yeah, you already asked it. Thanks.
Right. So my next section is implementation. So if I go on to that, Richard, if your questions aren't answered by the next section, then I'll stop again at the end and you can ask. It's just sometimes people find what I've just said quite a lot to take in, so we get more questions at that point. So how did we set about this? So first of all, we said to the residents of the New Era estate, this is voluntary. You don't have to opt into this. But if you do opt in, if you look at these two boxes on the right hand side, you'll receive a 3-year tenancy and a personalised rent with a qualified rent increase. And what we said the qualified rent increase is that the rents would go up by CPI plus 1%. If we assessed that someone's rent was currently, £600 a month, but they could afford to pay £800, we didn't think it was right for them to immediately have to pay the extra £200. So what we said we would do is we would increase their rent on an annual basis until they had reached their personalised rent. If they could afford to pay the £800, their rent would go up by CPI plus 4.5%. If they couldn't afford to pay more, their rent would go up in line with increases to social rents, which was CPI plus 0.5%. So the second option was if people didn't want to opt in, so they opted out, they would only get 1-year tenancy and they would have the annual rent increase of CPI plus 4.5%. So some people didn't initially opt in because they knew they'd have to pay more rent. They knew they'd be paying a CPI plus 4.5% increase anyway, but have subsequently opted in. Hopefully that answers your question about the rent increase, Richard. So we didn't immediately step everyone up to their personalised rent. We gradually took them up to their personalised rent. But if their personalised rent was higher than their base rent, they paid a slightly higher rent increase. So in order to administer this, we needed to get residents to share information with us. Now, if you are a renter on the private rented sector, you would be used to providing all of this information every time you started a new tenancy. But where you've got an established community and they haven't had to provide this because they've been in their tenancy for, several years, even though it was an assured short hold tenancy, it was a new thing for these households to have to provide this information. Whereas, on the majority of our homes that are sort of at below market rent, we assess people when they start the tenancy and we reassess them every 3 years. So to that extent, we're not doing anything different with our personalised rents than we are with our normal tenancies. We reassess people's eligibility every 3 years. And they had to provide us with this information, which we then put into a clever calculator using the Joseph Rowntree minimum income standards for their household type. And so that their rent was set, like I said earlier, by reference to how much they earned and what their household composition was. just to sort of show you, and this is sort of very specific to the New Era estate, but what we found was the vast majority of tenants, shown in the sort of the brighter blue, opted for personalised rent, but had the basic increase of CPI plus 1%. What I should add here is that the rents at this estate are essentially underwritten by local, they're below local housing allowances. So what we found is some of the residents were using benefits to afford the rents. And obviously, if we increase the rents, then that would be reflected by an increase in their benefit because they were below the local housing allowance. Only a small number, I think it's 12 here, had a personalised rent increase that was above the minimum, which meant that they were deemed to be able to afford more than the base rent that they were paying. And another 13 were on the standard rent, so they chose not to share their information with us or shared it in such a way that it didn't sort of meet our criteria. There were a number of regulated tenants, but if we look at it broadly, a third of people were on higher than the basic increase and 2/3 of the estate were on the basic increase. And what this enabled us to do was, as and when flats fell vacant, we could look at the total rent envelope for the estate, work out how much money we needed to get from rent in order to maintain and manage the estate, and so let the flats that became vacant at the lowest possible rent to the person that could afford it, so that we were providing as much charitable benefit, i.e. as much discounted rate as we could afford to do as a charity, whilst meeting our obligations towards managing and maintaining the estate. Just to give you a bit of a picture about what therefore happened to the rents. I've done this up to 2022 because after 2022, some funny things happened in rent settlements, and I'm sure lots of you know there was a social rent freeze in 2023, and because inflation was so high. So these numbers go up to 2022. What this showed is the average rent increase was only 3% per annum, because so many of the residents on the estate couldn't afford to pay a lot more. So what that showed was their fears that they were going to be priced out of living in that location didn't materialise. The rent increases that they have had have A, been adapted to their personal circumstances, but B, have not been significantly above inflation. And also that when you look at how market rents have increased between 2014 and 2022, these are sort of very kind of reasonable levels of rent increases. So what are the outcomes? So for us as an organisation, or for the rental outcomes, we've got an efficient allocation of subsidies. So people quite often look at discounted rents as, you know, what rent they're paying, but the way we should also look at them is that they are a discount to a market rent, and that discount is a subsidy. And when you've got to manage and run an estate or some properties, there's only so much discount you can afford to give, and so you want to make sure that discount has the maximum impact. And so by these personalised rents, the discount that we gives the maximum, is an efficient allocation of subsidy. Because we've assessed each household individually, we have a low level of bad debts and voids and rent arrears, because people don't move because they can't afford the rent, because we've assessed they can afford the rent. And what we were giving to residents during their 3-year tenancy was rent certainty. Actually, what we have done from 2015 to 2018 and then 2018 onwards is we have essentially renewed the policy, each time giving them a 3-year tenancy when they prove their eligibility. Us as an organisation, I think I explained earlier that we can target what we need in order to maintain and manage the estate and meet the trustees' financial fiduciary duties. And we can also meet our charitable objectives because we can let homes to those in greatest need or target certain types of workers. And that's where I'm really interested in this conversation. In reality, and hopefully, Richard, this answers a few more of what kind of gives you a bit more flavour to what you're asking about, the management of it. It's not massively resource intensive because we only do the assessment every 3 years, and I would say it probably costs us about £100 in time costs to do the assessment, but we do go and visit everybody individually if that's what they want, or they can send us their information. There's a certain amount of admin time that is taken in collating the information, but we also it helped us learn a lot more about those living on the estate and understanding their needs because we were going and visiting them, but also understanding their financial situation. And whilst we had a lot of people working, we've got an ageing estate, and a growing number of pensioners. And it has enhanced, that time that we spend with the residents has really helped enhance our relationship with residents. We've tried to roll personalised rents out in other places. We've not been able to retrospectively apply it to a planning application, but because it would have cost us a lot of money to change the planning application, but what we have done is at this property, which is Westbourne Park Baptist Church, so in sort of northwest Westminster, in order to keep the rents a bit lower and broaden the number of people that we'd be able to let to, the 2 and 3 bedroom flats have been let on a personalised rents basis, with people paying therefore what they can afford to pay, which again means we're not charging the maximum rent we could legally charge, but we are making the most of our charitable sort of benefit. So thank you. I have added my email address here so that if anyone is watching this as a recording, they can drop me an email if they've got any questions. So for now, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and see if anyone has got any more questions. Sorry, that's a bit of a quick run through.
No, that was great. Thank you, Olivia, so much. I think that there are lots to digest and lots to take away, I suspect, and lots of heads worrying about how this might apply in the NHS. But have we got any questions for Olivia at this point? Richard.
Hello. Yeah, so obviously you talked about things like being linked to LHA, so people on benefits kind of cut the affordability. I'm just wondering whether you think that there could be any issues with if the rent levels were a lot higher for people on higher incomes, and then what happens where they don't have the fallback of, I don't know, they lose a job or something happens where suddenly their rent, the rent that's being charged becomes unaffordable to them and they don't have a fallback like benefits or something to be able to afford it. Is there any?
Yeah, so that's probably not applicable specifically at this property because, like I said, the rents are below the local housing allowance. We do have some of our what we call intermediate rents at other properties which are above the local housing allowance. And what we prefer to do as a charity, and we've just sent out our rent review letters, and we say the same thing in our rent review letters, is we give everybody a rent increase, we charge everybody the same rent, but if you come to us because your personal circumstances have changed and you need us to work with you because for a period of time you can't afford to pay the rent, then we would rather deal with people as individuals. Again, that gives us a greater charitable benefit by working with people individually. And actually, when we sent out our rent review letters last year, out of sort of a portfolio of 840, I think we had about 20 households that came to us and said, we can't afford to pay the rent. And I think of those, only 3 eventually provided us with information that showed that they couldn't afford to pay their whole rent increase. And so we gave them either no or a lower rent increase on the basis of that. But yes, we do work with people when their circumstances change.
And those rents can theoretically go down too if somebody's circumstance changes?
Yeah, they could do. What we haven't done that in New Era because they've been set off such a low base mark and because they're below the local housing allowance. But this is, again, like I started at the very beginning, we would need to adapt what we do to each property and each circumstance and think about, when we put this in place, we had quite a lot of the team kind of going, well, what if this, what if that? So that, and we also had the residents at New Era saying the same thing to us so that we could create a policy that worked for this estate, but based on the principles of it being a rent that everybody could afford.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Jim?
Olivia, thank you. Jim Ward from Savills. When you've gone through the process of setting the personalised rent using the formula, what's the range of proportion of income that rent represents, either in proportion of net or proportion of gross?
Do you know, I don't know. We would do it on net. I don't know the answer to that question. It's not something that we've assessed because I think we just felt we had to move away from the 40% of net because it just didn't work.
Yeah, I'm just interested because so much of affordability analysis is done as a proportion of either net or gross. That sort of just observing the difference would be really interesting.
I think so. I know sort of anecdotally and from what people say they can afford that at lower income levels, you have a much lower proportion, and at higher income levels, we quite often have people not on our personalised rents, but at other locations. When we say to them, we don't think you can afford to pay this rent because your income it's more than 40% of your net income, people will pay more than 40% of their net income in rent, and they'll show to us that they can afford it, and they have been affording it by being in the markets and sort of market rental sector.
Interesting. Yeah. Thank you.
That's really helpful. Jess?
Thank you. And Olivia, it's lovely to see you again. And thank you so much for coming today and talking to us about this. It's brilliant. One of the major drawbacks from the pay to stay policy, which I'm not sure I particularly agreed with at the time, but a lot of the feedback was that the administration process for assessing people's affordability was going to kind of burn out any potential additional income that they could get through the adoption of that type of approach where you pay for whatever you can afford. Did I hear you right that your calculation is that the cost is about £100 per tenant in terms of the going through that assessment process?
I think so. Just, I don't know if this statistic is correct, but the thing that I heard was, so pay to stay, first of all, is a cliff edge. This is not a cliff edge. This is a gradual scale, and one of the statistic I heard, and I don't know if it's true, but in social housing tenants, there is probably only 1 in 10 who would have paid more rent. So to go and assess, your 100 people only have 10 that you're going to increase their rent, and some of them by not very much. I can understand that might have outweighed the benefits. The cost might have outweighed the benefits. When we've got intermediate rent and you get people with a greater range of incomes and a greater potential that their income will go up, because I mean, this is one of the reasons why we provide homes for intermediate rent, to allow people to sort of stabilise their careers and grow their careers in an area like London where they couldn't afford to live, but there is the opportunity to grow your career. We would probably get a much greater proportion of people that would be able to afford to pay more rent. And I think the graph that I showed you, the pie chart, showed that 1/3 of people that we assessed could afford to pay more. But I don't know if the 10% I'm telling you in social rent is correct. I think it was just felt that it was going to be a very low number. Sorry, does that answer, Jess?
Yeah, no, thank you. It's the administration burden, isn't it, that I think that people get nervous about, but that it doesn't. I'm not getting the sense that you feel like you've got any additional housing staff that you would usually have for traditional rent setting methodology.
No. But we, as an intermediate rent provider, so probably I should just explain a little bit more about Dolphin. Is we do have a housing association in our group, but we're not a housing association. We're a housing charity. So we don't operate like a normal, a normal social rent or housing provider. So we do reassess our tenants every 3 years. So this is just a normal thing to do. So we do it anyway. There's a bit more of a complicated calculation but we're trying to make sure that the benefit we provide goes to the people that most need it. And that's something that's quite controversial. And I've said it to people who've long established people in social housing and got told off for that one.
Thank you. I'm going to take 2 more, and then we must move on to Stephen, and then we can collect at the end. So Ian Burden, he's NHS England.
Hiya, thanks for this. And Olivia, that was great, really interesting. There is another company that I've spoken with where they also look to do personalised rents and to try and support people at the other end of the scale by the profits from those that can afford it. So which is brilliant. I think it's just an interesting reflection really for the group and for Sarah for the Homes Alliance. So from an accounting perspective, for the model that we're looking at, and for the finance aspects, we can't cap investor profit. So we can't cap that. I mean, they can create a profit, but they have to be able to do more. We've then got this balance of, well, what is affordability in the sense of the viability of a scheme. So we need schemes to be viable because the NHS can't contribute any funds to it. So as soon as you've got that viability question, you come back to what's the breakdown in, open market rent, what is open market rent, how do we discount it? So for me, that kind of says that actually what you've said, Olivia, perfectly makes sense, is really good, really supportive. in essence, it's not necessarily the NHS that needs to know this, because we can't stipulate what the investor is going to do. We need the investors to buy into it. We need the investors to be able to say, this is what we are suggesting. So it's just, how do we get this message to more investors to say, look, this does stack up for you. This does provide the viability that you need. If we don't get grant funding for one reason or another, you know, we come back to that viability. Will those investors still apply this route, or will they say another route? So it's not really point. I think it's a really good presentation. It's really good to take on board. It's just, where is that conversation best to be had to progress it, really?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, just a couple of really small observations on that. I mean, a lot of investors are looking for inflation-linked income, so I wonder if there's a time with that. But the other thing would be to say that you would offer a certain amount of discount, and you could quantify that as a sum, but it's up to you how you apply it amongst the different homes. And after that, you could let everything, or whatever, you know, a market rent. So there's an element of things could be market rented, but there's still, you know, you protect your discount that you're giving. Sorry, that's been one of our thoughts.
Yeah, so effectively, Olivia, what you're doing, where you're saying we need you're acting as the investor effectively, and so we need a certain amount of income to manage the estate. It's different to how much profit, but you're defining that, and then effectively you're spreading the discount based on, as a new tenancy comes in, you're determining what level you need that tenancy to be at in order to meet your average rent requirement for the estate as a whole. And I think, Ian, maybe there's something in that about thinking there's a difference between the rent for the building as a whole and the personalised rents for the individuals, and there's some ability to move within that, isn't there?
Absolutely. And those people that want to work with the NHS need to take that on board, kind of thing, because we can't necessarily stipulate this is what we want, because then that's...
No, but you can ask them in the bidding process, presumably, to define how they're going to do it. So you can do it a slightly different way around, and perhaps we can make the personalised rents model more widely known. I'm going to take Nancy quickly, and then we must move on.
Thank you. Hi, Nancy Silver from NHS England, London. Just a quick question, Olivia. So I understand that you build in to the model the sort of maintenance required for the block. What happens to sort of capital works that are required for sort of major works? How do they get built into the model?
Yeah, the way that we would look at it is we have a capital works programme, and we cost that, and then we spread that cost. So we would spread that. We would essentially make a sinking fund that we would draw from that in each year. Really interesting question, but we're still working through the process. And again, you might have to adapt what you do at each different property. Some investors would look at gross to net and take capital out of that, and would put the capital back in when they needed to.
Right, understood. Thank you.
So I've just got one request. Just if anyone is operating in locations where Dolphin's got homes and you want to contact me just to see how we might be able to work with you, you know, and again, I don't want to promote my homes to your residents, but your workers, but I want to show them that this is something that they can benefit from. If you could contact me, that would be really appreciated.
And I think, Richard, we might have a think about how we're talking about putting together a whole source of data on the NHS Homes Alliance site. And I know Ian has got some elements on the NHS England site, but that's harder. But the NHS Homes Alliance site is somewhere where we can start to hold some of this stuff. So we should make sure that Dolphin are kind of visible on that site, Richard, at least so that chief people officers and those in trusts in the right areas are aware of what might be available.
Yeah, and we're quite happy to kind of find out to organisations that might be able to do things in the space. So that's fine.
And there's a number of local authorities that run intermediate housing lists in London. So those are it's worth it in each location. Finding out if your local authority can help you as well. People just don't know we're available.
Yeah, so I think part of what the Alliance is trying to do is act as a bit of a signpost, and the work that Richard's doing. I'm going to thank Olivia very much. I'm sure if there are more questions at the end and questions by email, and we will post the recording on the Homes Alliance site, and we'll post on LinkedIn as well. So maybe we can carry on the conversation a little bit on LinkedIn. Might be quite interesting. Stephen, can I hand over to you, and thank you, and I'm sorry, we're 20 minutes left-ish.
Well, my presentation's only 10 minutes, so I'll hopefully I'll keep you to time.
Thank you.
Just briefly, I'm Stephen Barnes. I work for a company called Capita, and we're currently putting a business case together for a central London NHS trust for key worker housing. And I've just got about 8 slides I can just talk through, and then we can go through questions.
That would be great. Thank you.
Let me just share the screen. Is that coming up on people's screens?
Yes, I can see that.
So what I've been asked to talk about is the challenge of making affordable rents affordable. And obviously, Olivia's just been touching on that. And I was just going to tell you a story about a live project that we're currently working on, which is a Central London NHS trust, which is in urgent need of affordable housing, as we've already talked about, to address the staff retention and recruitment challenges. And there's a secondary objective, which is replacing aging medical facilities to address operational needs, which I can explain why that's linked in a moment. The requirements clearly are affordable rents for the key worker staff. As Ian, I think, very briefly touched on, it's got to be IFRS 16 and CEDAW compliant, so effectively it's off balance sheet. And again, it's got to be a financially viable solution using the housing rental income, as there are no other funds from NHSE or central government. If I can hopefully move on. So we've touched on a lot of the background that so many NHS workers in London are struggling to live due to the cost of living crisis and escalating rents. And also it's their work-life balance, which is being so challenged with long commutes and poor quality housing at the moment, which is leading to high staff leaving rates. And also the trusts are struggling to attract domestic UK staff, which is again putting pressure to look overseas for staff. And currently the trust we're working for is looking at about 25% of their recruitment from overseas. And the work that Savills have kindly done some survey work for staff, and one of their stark statistics that they came up with was that potentially up to about 45% of the workforce, NHS workforce, was actually considering either leaving or moving out of London over the next 5 years, just purely because they can't afford to live in London. So, this is a real live issue, which this particular trust is desperately trying to grapple with. And we've written a strategic outline case, and we've moved on to writing an outline business case to support the trust to solve this issue. The actual housing concept is fairly simple, and the trust has got existing clinics in central London, and what we're considering is re-providing the clinical space on ground floors and then building above key worker housing. So, I mean, this just shows a basic design concept with the parking, and the yellow is the clinical space. And then on the right-hand side, that's a particular floor on one of the residential floors, which would house 1, 2, and 3 bed housing units. The cohort types that we're looking at for this particular trust are either singles with dependents or singles, and similarly couples with dependents or couples. And because we're in London for this particular design opportunity, the assumptions are that because it's on public sector land, the requirement from the GLA is that at least 50% of the housing mix must be affordable. And to look at these sort of affordability of staff, we're taking an average of around about a £33,000 salary for a single person, and between a 50 and 55k salary for a couple. And as again, has already been mentioned, 40% of net salary or 30% of gross is what we're considering as affordable. But then on top of that, there are deductions that need to be made for those with dependents who, you know, have additional cost burdens on their everyday lives. This table goes through the cohorts and the typical kind of requirements for what they're looking for. And you can see that roughly 50% of the Savills survey indicates that it's singles that are in need of accommodation, and roughly again 50% are for couples. What's some of the analysis that's been done is to determine what the affordable rent might be for each of the cohorts, and you can see the numbers here ranging from just over £700 a month to and for couples who don't have dependents to, you know, just under £1,400. And then because when we started to analyse what might be affordable, and the 80% of market has already been mentioned, when we started to look at 80% of market rent, that they just none of the cohort that we were looking at would have been able to afford this particular, kind of those kind of level of rents, because in central London, typically, if you take a 2-bedroom house, you know, the rents could be up to £3,000. So an 80% would take it down to about £2,400. And as you can see from the figures in the in this affordable rent column, none, you know, will be able to afford kind of that even 80% of market rent. So we're considering as a starting point the London living rents that the mayor has set across London, which is on the right-hand column. And I've just sort of coloured these, rag rated them, because a 1-bedroom house, for example, under the London living rent is round about the £1,100 mark. And as you can see, for singles with dependents, they wouldn't even be able to afford the London living rent, even though that's roughly 50% or less than market rent. And it's only kind of when you move on to the couples, either with dependents or not, that then you probably move into the more affordable area for, you know, if you use the London living rents as a benchmark. So there is this massive challenge in London, as probably many of you will know, about how on earth you create affordable rents. I'm just trying to move the presentation on. So just in the viability modelling that we've been looking at, we've looked at a range of options which are listed here. And first of all, it's looking at highly efficient designs, housing designs to keep the costs down, looking at the minimum provision of the minimum requirements that the GLA require for example, a 1-bedroom flat, which is 37 metres squared, which is a 1-bed, 1-person type property. It's a lot of it's you know, seeing if, you know, we're having conversations with the local authority to see if there's an option of actually negotiating down the number of affordable units, again, to make it more affordable rather than so we have slightly less than 50%, but, you know, our desire is obviously to create as many affordable units as possible. We're looking at how we might generate third-party income to help subsidise the affordable rents. We're looking to what grants are available, and also talking to potential development partners to see if they can actually offer more affordable funding for the scheme. Also long shots, which are not favoured by any means with the local authority that we're talking to, are things like flat shares, co-living type products, and also shared living type accommodation. But we've been told by the local authority that something like co-living, which would be smaller, maybe more affordable units for single people, is a bit of a dirty word, and they're very keen to maintain the GLA compliant sized affordable housing units. So final slide. We're working with the client to come up with a business case solution which will present all sorts of benefits, which obviously include things like reduced staff turnover, more sustainable workforce, better staff morale, improved service delivery, and clearly reduced recruitment costs, which is an important factor. But there are also spin-off benefits, which will include more efficient clinical facilities, new facilities, and also reduced running costs in terms of energy and maintenance and other similar things. So that's just a very quick snapshot of what we're doing, and very happy to take any questions.
Stephen, thank you very much. It's a really nice sort of interactions with what Olivia was talking about earlier around the personalised rents, and I'm sure we're all busy trying to hold Olivia's graph in our head and apply it to that personalised rent scenario. So I think definitely some work to be done with some of the work that Dolphin have already done. So have we got any questions for Stephen about the experiences that they're finding? So Mary.
Yeah, no, I thought that's really interesting, and I can't remember who said it, but I understand there have been some negotiations with the GLA about reducing affordable housing, not just in number terms, but to make sure you actually provide more social rent. So there's actually a real benefit rather than just saying, oh, we're doing less, which is what most developers will do, but to actually say we're doing it to get that more socially affordable. Because looking at those figures, you're already looking at 33k. I mean, there's NHS workers who are earning less than that.
Yep.
And I just had a quick look at the Dolphin Living. For a lot of the shared ownership, you've got to be earning 50, 60. So is that sort of lower end? It's always difficult, isn't it, negotiating down affordable housing, and you don't want to see that because it's so important. But it's about that genuinely affordable. But really, really interesting to see that. That's my only comment, really.
Yes, I mean, Richard and I have been chatting about this, and to see whether there is pressure, even from central government level, that could be put on, the likes of the GLA for London specifically, about whether there's any flexibility in their thinking. But as Richard, you'll probably comment on this, but it's a real challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, sorry, John, I'll let you come in a second. I think, yeah, obviously this is one of the places where the ideal solution is then to deliver the 50% and all of the standard kind of tenure splits of affordable housing. I think it's one of the things I've come across on numerous schemes, especially NHS side, where you're trying to do in some cases quite a large clinical redevelopment, where there's a kind of cross subsidy from income into that, and then what that means for the overall viability of a scheme where you've got a mixed use with housing and other things, and it is just a constant challenge. And obviously, yeah, trying to reach that ideal solution is the first point of call, but then it's about having the discussions about kind of what the possibilities are in terms of the compromises and other things to deliver a scheme at all in some cases. Yeah, and that's a real challenge, both from a policy and kind of strategy and an ideal outcome position, but then yeah, making the viability work to get something off the ground at all has been, yeah, especially in the last couple of years, a big challenge.
So it's obvious the topic is causing interest. John, and then I'm conscious we've just got a couple of minutes left, but I'm sure we can continue the conversation in other forums going forward. So John.
Great, thank you, Sarah. I just wanted to check, Stephen, and I may have missed this, but what kind of engagement has been done with staff themselves in terms of what their wants and needs are? I just wonder, was there much consultation, and is there plans kind of post engagement?
Well, I've got two of the other sort of people on this call are Jim and Lydia, and I don't want to steal any credit from you guys because it from Savills, and they did the staff the detailed staff surveys. So I don't know whether Jim or Lydia you want to say anything, or I can comment.
Lydia, do you remember what sort of response rate we got from the staff survey?
I think when we did the staff survey, we had an about 11% response rate. So a good couple of hundred responses. And it was, very in-depth, detailed survey all about kind of current housing situation and kind of future needs, future requirements as well. So we're able to kind of gather a lot of really, detailed insight and understanding to kind of think about future needs as well.
Thank you.
Great. So any other questions? So I think it's Stephen, one of my not working in the London space, but I suppose the obvious question comes back to grant funding here, doesn't it? And actually pushing the case for grant funding, where you've got someone that is, as an NHS trust, is happy to deliver more truly affordable accommodation, and it's not about profit, it's about viability and whether grant funding, given the need to deliver homes, given the push for brownfield sites. And to me, that feels like a conversation that perhaps there are some on this call it might be more difficult for, but actually trying to create a little bit more of a groundswell of discussion about really getting under the skin of this and why, how much impact that grant position could have. But I'm sure Richard will have a view, and then we must wrap up.
I'll just quickly say there are some GLA colleagues on this call, and we've had numerous kind of informal earlier discussions about what the grant possibilities are with GLA colleagues. So A, I'm grateful for those, but also B, there is a kind of open door for people to be able to have a discussion about what those numbers might look like and what the challenges of individual schemes are in the new programme. It's negotiable on the basis of the kind of needs of the scheme. So there are always kind of limits of how far you can push that in terms of grant on individual projects, but those lines of communication are open, which is very helpful just to be able to unpick some of the issues and possibilities. And I'm always happy to connect people.
Yeah, through you. So Can I just finish by thanking Olivia and Stephen very much. It's been a really interesting hour. I have a feeling we could have gone on much longer, but thank you both. Lots to take away and think about, and I look forward to watching the conversation carry on LinkedIn and other channels. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.